Folks, it's been something to see these last several weeks, hasn't it? Over in the Netherlands, the government declaring war on their own farmers. Oh, yeah. It's all about the nitrogen content of fertilizer and whatnot, and it's going to mean higher prices for the farmers. It's going to mean higher prices for consumers when they buy their groceries. It's also going to mean some of the farmers are going to go out of business. And we're talking about multi-generational farms. It is an absolute disgrace. And of course, because it is such a catastrophe, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is carbon copying the plan for Canadian farmers in the road ahead. Absolutely despicable. Well, you also know that we've had Lewis Brackpool and Lincoln Jay go over to the Netherlands to cover this protest by the Dutch farmers, something you don't see on the mainstream media. And I'm happy to tell you that Lewis Brackpool is joining me now to get us up to date and tell us about a brand new documentary produced by Rebel that will be coming out shortly. Hey, Lewis, how you doing today, my friend?
Yeah, I'm well. It's good to see you. Thank you very much for having me on.
Well, it is always a pleasure. Now, Lewis, you and Lincoln, but especially you've spent a lot of time in the Netherlands. When you talk to the men and women on the street, when you talk to the farmers themselves, what do they make of this? Because I always thought, in terms of politics, no matter where in the world you are, if you're a government and you declare war on the farmers, you are going to lose big time. It's almost like declaring war on the veterans. These are third rail topics. They're no-go zones. So why is this government pursuing this in the first place?
It's a great question. I mean, from what I've gathered from speaking to the farmers myself, they're even saying the same thing. I mean, they've picked the wrong group, is what one of them said. I honestly, it's unbelievable to see Mark Rutte's government and, of course, the World Economic Forum, technically too, with this overarching green policies that they're implementing upon the farmers, which inevitably is going to affect the Netherlands as a whole. And we're going to be seeing it in other countries such as Canada, Ireland, and we've seen what's happened in Sri Lanka when they've implemented these types of policies, reducing fertilizer usage and many other things. But the main cause of concern as well is actually seizing of the farmlands in the Netherlands to potentially build houses on top, according to the farmers, which is very counterproductive if this is supposed to be a green policy. Let's reduce to net zero, but then we're going to take your land and then build on top of it. It just doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense. And let's address, Lewis, the hypocrisy afoot here. I mean, you mentioned the World Economic Forum. Increasingly, they're telling us to eat bugs. For whatever reason. They're also revisiting an idea they floated in 2016, which went down to defeat, but I guess they're going to give it another shot, of people giving up their personal automobiles. So eating bugs, getting rid of the car. And yet I can't help but think, Lewis, do you think Klaus Schwab is going to be having a cricket sandwich and riding his bicycle as opposed to being driven in a limousine-driven limo to the next meeting? I mean, I'm tongue-tied because the hypocrisy here is just outrageous. I say when the likes of Klaus Schwab and all the WEF directors lead by example, then maybe I'll look into having a bug or three and putting the car up for sale. What say you, my friend?
Well, yeah, I think you're completely right. And even if they do lead by example, I don't think I could stoop to the level of eating bugs personally. That's just not on my menu. But it's weird, isn't it? You're seeing this not just only in the Netherlands, but you're seeing it in Canada, you're seeing it in Britain as well, and you're seeing it in Ireland and Australia and many other countries as well. So it seems to be part of the playbook. Now, that's weird in itself when you've got different countries with different governments and supposedly different political standpoints, but all parroting the same message and pushing through the same agenda. There's a lot of questions that need answering with that. And I think that's why we like to ask these questions a lot with regards to the World Economic Forum. So, Yeah, I think a lot of people are now starting to wake up and realize what's going on, and actually starting to ask the right questions when not only the World Economic Forum, but of course their own government and what they're trying to implement. You mentioned about fuel as well, and reduction of that. It's the same thing happening in Britain. When Boris Johnson was here as Prime Minister before he resigned, he announced that by 2030, the classic year that we keep hearing about,
Yes.
they want to completely eradicate petrol and diesel and transition into electric cars. And that's why 50% of tax here in Britain of fuel is implemented by the government. They could easily reduce that at any point to help, of course, motorists, but they don't do that because they want to see people transition into this new era, this great reset that Klaus Schwab keeps echoing.
Yeah, there's always that date, 2030, for some reason. And by the way, speaking of dates, I've urged our viewers, Lewis, to, if they can, dig up the 1973 film Soylent Green, which I'm not going to give out any spoilers, but which also deals with a incredible food replacement, something that would make an insect look like a piece of filet mignon. And it is set actually in 2022, the year we're living in, and it is eerily prescient. So, please, if you can check out that movie, it'll make your spine tingle. By the way, when it comes to bugs, Lewis, what is the rule with vegans and vegetarians? Are they allowed to eat bugs? Because I know they're living things technically, but on the other hand, they're the creatures that eat up all their veggies when they're being grown. Do we have a referee's ruling on whether or not bugs can make it onto the menu of vegans and vegetarians?
Well, I think that's a good idea for a next video. I think asking vegans and vegetarians whether eating bugs is humane and it's okay, or you can compare it with eating an animal and of course eating a bug. Where do they stand with it? But if a vegan's going to turn around and say, you've got to stop eating meat and implement their ideas on other people, it's not my concern if someone wants to change their diet, but it's the implementation on others, right? So you have to be consistent with that. So surely bugs is off the menu for them.
Okay, then. But, getting back to business, as I alluded to earlier, Lewis, we have a new documentary. I believe Kean Simone, K2, as he's known around the office here, he was one of the forces behind this documentary. What is it going to reveal to our audience, my friend?
Yeah, so it's a documentary called The Buddha, a Dutch farmer rebellion, and it follows the history of this rebellion that we're seeing currently. And the story isn't over, essentially. So it's one big cliffhanger, really, because we don't know how this is going to end and how this is going to resolve. But it started back in 2019 with animal rights activists storming a particular farm, which spawned then a counter-protest, an organization known as the Farmers Defence Force, who didn't want this to be published to the media in a negative light. And then the same year, Mark Rutte and his government declared a nitrogen emissions emergency, which meant they needed to slash livestock by 50% and, of course, cap emissions for this nitrogen, or stikstof, as they call it over in the Netherlands. And it's basically the timeline and understanding what it means, what's happened and what's happening, including our reports for when myself, and Lincoln Jay were out in the Netherlands to cover this rebellion. And currently, as we stand, tensions are still extremely high in the Netherlands, and there has been no resolution so far. We know that organizations have gotten together, and there's been no resolution from the government side. They're just not budging. And like the farmers have stated, I think they've picked the wrong group.
Oh, I think so too. But at the end of the day, Lewis, I don't know if there's been any polling of the public in the Netherlands in terms of the government's policies, which I personally think have nothing to do with saving the planet and getting their targets in line for 2030, and has everything to do with virtue signaling. They're pretending that reducing fertilizer levels and whatnot is for our collective benefit, when there's really no science to prove that. So going back to the feeling of the public at large, what support does this government have for these incredibly ridiculous policies?
Well, that's a great question. I know there was a poll conducted, and we know polls, okay, they're very unreliable. They couldn't predict Trump. They couldn't predict Brexit. So take it with a pinch of salt, of course. But a poll was conducted where it showed that 85% of the people in the Netherlands actually support the farmers. So that's great news.
Wow.
If that poll is very reliable. The problem is, there's a big minority of people who are, of course, taking action and demonstrating and showing their support actively. But there's, of course, still a vast amount of people who are still either sitting on the fence or just don't want to get involved. And unfortunately, that is coming from the cities. So it is the city people that kind of need to step up, in my opinion, to show their support if they're really serious about if they want food on the table, essentially.
Yeah, you know what? That's a great point, Lewis. I mean, and city people, I'm sure when they go to their supermarket, I guess they have this feeling that it just magically appears on the shelves. There's not a growing process and a harvesting process. And of course, truckers that get it to market. If this government has its way and those supermarket shelves go empty, that's going to be a real come to Jesus moment for the city people of the Netherlands. Lewis, thank you again for your time. I think you and Lincoln have been doing absolutely superb work covering what's happening in the Netherlands. And I think I speak for our entire audience when I say we can hardly wait to see this documentary. So you keep at it, my friend.
Thank you very much. And you can watch the documentary over at farmerdocumentary.com. And of course, I briefly returned to the Netherlands to check out or scope out the situation in the Netherlands, because as I keep saying, that the tensions are extremely high over there, and we don't know what's going to happen. We just really don't. So I went over there to scope it out, and you can see all the reports coming up on farmerrebellion.com. So that's farmerdocumentary.com for the documentary. And of course, the reports on the ground journalism is farmerrebellion.com. And once again, David, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
What you just saw was an excerpt from my nightly show, the Ezra Levant Show. Every weekday, I do a monologue. Usually it's about half an hour. Then I interview an interesting guest, and then we read my hate mail or my fan mail, whichever is more fun. It's only available behind a paywall, though. That's how we pay our bills here at Rebel News. We don't take a dime from Justin Trudeau. But the good news is it's only $8 a month, about half the price of Netflix. And in addition to my nightly show, you also get weekly shows from 4 other friends here at Rebel News. So you're getting 36 shows a month just for $8. I think it's worth it. And even if you're not quite sure, do it anyways, because we rely on viewers like you to keep us free and independent. I promise you I'll never take a dime from Trudeau. Just go to rebelnewsplus.com and click subscribe. Thanks.